Hello, my name is Lee Rovers. I am a first-year University of Guelph history student, and my pronouns are they, them, and theirs. This is my entry into the 2023 Symposium. The title of my work is Swear It, Greek Gender and Sexuality Through a Modern Lens. Let's get it. This presentation, in tandem with the paper of the same name, will be looking at how accurately antiquated Greek ideas surrounding gender and sexuality have survived to this day, using Madeline Miller's book, The Song of Achilles, as a lens. Specifically, this presentation aims to see if men, women, and same-sex couples, and the ideas and attitudes surrounding them have been accurately transcribed to a modern viewpoint, as what was seen in ancient Greece. What is the Song of Achilles? The Song of Achilles is a 2011 novel written by Madeline Miller. In it, she reimagines Homer's Iliad as a love story between Achilles, demigod son of Thetis and the greatest Greek hero, and Patroclus, his close friend and comrade. Throughout the novel, the reader sees the relationship blossom behind the backdrop of the Trojan War. This is not necessarily a new idea, as many have already speculated that they were lovers. But this is the first time anyone has written the story with that being the focus. Instead, most retellings opt to describe the entire war, without the focus being solely on their relationship. In terms of mythological accuracy, little has changed from the original text, aside from Achilles and Patroclus' relationship. This presentation will examine how accurate each character's portrayal is to what was normal in Greek society, where man had heightened importance and women were often marginalized. This presentation will also contrast the characters in both works to one another. Firstly, we will look at what the customs were for same-sex couples. Male same-sex couples in ancient Greece usually fell under the system of pederasty. Under pederasty, it was typical to see an older man, or the aristes, chase after a younger man, or elomenos. It was then usual to see the older partner teach the young man how to interact with society until he was fully ready to enter society on his own. At that point, the aristes and eromenos would cut contact with one another. It was also typical for the eromenos to have significantly less independence in the relationship, with the aristes leading him instead. It is important to remember this system when talking about Achilles and Patroclus, for historical accuracy and how the author handles what has now become a controversial topic. Secondly, we must focus on whether or not Achilles was actually queer, as the Iliad makes this unclear. Both Achilles and Patroclus are seen having heterosexual relationships with other characters in the story, such as Achilles and Briseis, and thus the entire premise of Achilles and Patroclus having this same-sex attraction to one another is immediately debatable. However, another classical source in Plato shows them having same-sex relationships. In Plato's Symposium, They are seen as the lovers that Madeline Miller characterizes them as they are both sexual and romantic with one another. This gives Miller's work some actual classical foundation. Secondly, we will look at their relationship through the lens of pederasty. The Song of Achilles chooses not to show Achilles and Patroclus as being in a pederastic relationship, as some have speculated they were in during the events of the Iliad. Their ages are a lot closer together than what is depicted in the source work, distancing itself from this act. Thomas Hubbard, however, has speculated that whatever relationship was shown in the Iliad would have also not been pederastic, as both of them are certainly adults by the 10th year of the war, during which the siege of Troy and the death of Patroclus take place, and still Achilles grieves heavily for Patroclus, showing a deeper sense of affection than one would associate with pederasty. While rare, there are some genuine cases of love sprouting from pederastic relationships. According to Aristotle in his Nicomachean Ethics, he does detail how some will stay with their pederastic partners out of respect and love of the person they become long after they both are adults. Quote, many couples continue their relationship if, as a result of spending time together, they come to love each other's character because they are of similar character. While rare, it is not impossible to conclude that this relationship could have happened and thus could be considered accurate to an antiquated Greek lifestyle. Lastly, we will discuss how the power dynamic works in the relationship. Another point of concern is the lack of a defined Aristes and Eromenos. Instead, the author opts for mutual pleasure when showing sexual encounters. However, it is largely shown that both of them operate within the system outside of sex, with Achilles taking the role of the Aristes and Patroclus being the Eromenos. This is something more akin to how women were to receive sexual pleasure in pederastic relationships, according to what little remains of Sappho's work. In contrast to the male idea of the older individual receiving all of the pleasure and power between the two, Sappho discusses how both partners would give each other similar sexual gratification, with neither one having more importance than the other. To summarize, the relationship lasting as long as it does would not have been seen frequently, but could hypothetically exist in the Greek world, as there are documented cases of men enjoying each other's company enough to remain in a relationship past sexual maturity for both partners, such as the case of Alexander the Great and his lover Hephaestion. While the sexual aspect does more closely resemble female pederastic relationships, as described by Sappho, it is possible for this kind of sexual relationship to exist in Greek society. However, it would be seen as a lot less common. Next, I shall discuss men in myth. Men in myth were supposed to be strong and courageous individuals who were willing to put down their lives for any cause. They were a guiding sense of morality for much of the Greek public, specifically the Greek youth. Because this is a retelling of the Iliad with a male-dominated cast, it is important to look at these male characters with a sense of scrutiny, especially Patroclus, who is the point of view character for this book. Patroclus in the Song of Achilles does not fit into the stereotype of a Greek hero. He is meek, sheepish, and shows his heart much more regularly than Achilles does. He is even recommended by Chiron to work as a medic rather than be a fighter on the front lines of the Trojan War. This absolutely flies in the face of everything a man was supposed to be, especially in times of war, and would appear as a glaring inaccuracy, both to what was expected of men in ancient Greece and to his characterization in the Iliad. However, Miller does this intentionally. Madeline Miller uses Patroclus to bring awareness of just how unfair the experience of living in ancient Greece was to those who did not fit into the definition of manhood as discussed earlier. Patroclus deliberately flies in the face of ancient Greek ideas, and thus he serves as an ideal lens from which to view this world. It is only through Patroclus that the reader can see this diversely unfair world, because he is the only one who is equipped to see that world for how discriminatory it is. Anybody else, such as Achilles, would not be able to see this same world, as he gains so heavily from operating in this world in the way that is expected of a man. By using Patroclus' point of view instead of Achilles, it goes against what the reader expects from a retelling of the Iliad and what the world of the Iliad was painted as in the original text, further subverting the reader's expectations. On the topic of Patroclus' sensitivity, Carla Jimenez Otero writes that, quote, "The sensitivity conveyed through Patroclus' narrative allows the reader to question the roles attributed to the different characters in the story according to their gender. All of them had certain behaviors and social norms that they were supposed to perform because of who they were and what they loved. But Patroclus defied the ideologies that had been perpetuated by his society for centuries, daring to break the standards that a man had to respect to be respected in return. So while yes, Patroclus is shown as sensitive, and while this would go against several things in ancient Greece, this is done to allow the reader to contrast what was normal in ancient Greece with what is normal today. Lastly, we will discuss women in Greek myth, who were often portrayed with venom. Women were portrayed as helpless victims at best, stripped of their agency, such as the case with Persephone, malicious individuals who are devoid of the ability to be trusted, such as Medea, or an allegory for the root of all evil, as Pandora is seen as, creating an easy scapegoat to further isolate these individuals from society. And this view was reinforced in society, as women did not enjoy the same privileges of men. For example, they could not vote as they were deemed too irrational to make important decisions, and they seldom left the house without the company of a man, as they were seen as too prized to be left on their own. They were seen more as an object, and this even applies to the beginning of the Trojan War with Helen of Troy. Before discussing women in the Song of Achilles, we must discuss Madeline Miller's role as a feminist author. Madeline Miller has stated in many interviews that she does write her books about Greek mythology with a feminist viewpoint in mind. This is more apparent than her other works, such as Circe, but should also be applied to the Song of Achilles. She shows her views on society by allowing female characters to have a heightened sense of importance in typically male-dominated stories. Take, for example, the titular character of Circe, who was taken as a minor villain in the Odyssey and given her own detailed story, motivation, and more importantly, agency in Miller's retelling of her story. This provides some important reasoning as to why she would willingly go against Greek myth, to highlight marginalized people in the world that these characters find themselves in, and is important to consider while viewing these characters, that they are indeed imperfect representations of Greek ideas, but this is intentional. Women in the Song of Achilles. The main female representation in the Song of Achilles is Briseis, the war prize of Achilles, a minor character in the Iliad who is mostly used to show that Achilles is prideful, I believe, is used in Miller's work to show how depictions of women have evolved, similarly to how Patroclus is used. Miller takes an underwritten side character and allows her to stand on her own with the men of the story, all through the eyes of Patroclus, as he is the only one who can relate to what she's going through. There is a legitimate conversation to be had regarding whether or not highlighting marginalized voices at the cost of accuracy of myths is welcome in the field of classics. Personally, I am of the belief that this should be welcome in discussions, to allow more people who were marginalized in antiquity to have their voices heard, to allow a more diverse range of opinions, and to allow more stories like this to emerge as a result. In conclusion, the Song of Achilles does get certain aspects wrong with its showing of men and women, but it does so purposefully to highlight marginalized voices and allow the reader to contrast and compare the treatment of men and women in ancient Greece to modern day, to see just how far that it has progressed. The relationship between Achilles and Patroclus would be rare, but would also be possible in ancient Greece. However, sexually, it would be more common to see their relationship be between two women rather than being between two men. And finally, I would just like to give a few thanks. First of all, I would like to thank the Guelph Classic Society for allowing me to come and write about this topic that I've been very interested in for the past little while. I'd like to thank my parents and my friends who have all supported me through the writing of my paper. Specifically, to highlight a few people, I'd like to thank my friend Rachel, who helped me out with the editing of the paper. I'd like to thank Holly from the Classic Society for helping me with the editing of my slideshow. And I would like to thank you, the viewer, for taking time out of your probably very busy schedule to listen to my presentation. I cannot wait to perform live in front of all of y'all, and I will see you Sunday. Thank you.